Human being, Tina such in Aristotle Onassis' imagination. She was a possession. It didn't work out because Tina was very rich in her own right, and they lived in a sort of a glitzy environment. She went skiing in the winter. He didn't like to ski. He liked to sit in his boat and drink and go out. So marriages like that tend to not to last too long.
Maria Callas was opera's most celebrated figure, with fans who thought nothing of waiting all night in the cold to hear her voice.
She's a real star in every sense of the word. She's a great actress. She's a great singer. She's a fabulous personality, you know?
Married to her impresario Giovanni Menenghini, Callas soon won another admirer. Onassis invited the Menenghinis for a sail, which included a nostalgic visit to his homeland of Smyrna. A guest list with Winston Churchill on it was impressive to Callas, but it was the chemistry between Onassis and herself that made the trip memorable. Within a month, both Tina and Maria filed for divorce from their spouses as life imitated opera.
Menenghini reacted like a typical Italian. He cried, he screamed, he became hysterical, threatened to commit suicide, and then did absolutely nothing but ask for some money from her, which he got.
The world's two most famous Greeks began a torrid love affair that dazzled cafe society, made spicy reading in all the tabloids, and proved once again that love is blind.
I think that the basic attraction between Onassis and Callas was pure sex, which had never happened to Callas before.
Menenghini had helped Maria slim down, but with Onassis, she underwent a total metamorphosis.
He made her lose weight. He took her to different dressmakers in Paris, and he made her over. And he treated her, and he was the first man to do so, he treated her as if she were a sex goddess, as if she were a sex object. And she loved it, and she bloomed, and she adored that.
The media hounded the couple.
I'm giving no interview.
The only reason why did you cut short your trip?
Please.
Are you going to marry Mr.
I said don't. I'm not answering any interview. Now stop it.
We are very two close and dear friends. But unfortunately, this statement doesn't suit the spicy part of the press.
On the Christina, Callas led a self-indulgent life that suited her to a fault. In spite of his disapproval, she began to neglect her singing, skipping practice sessions and even performances. The more she withdrew from her operatic career, the more disenchanted he became.
He got a bad rap. It came out that he sort of dropped her after he used her. She was finished anyway. She didn't want to practice. She didn't want to rehearse. She had worked hard all her life. Why the hell should she continue working for glory when she was very happy with Onassis sitting on the boat?
And this, ironically, was what destroyed the relationship, because she was part of this need for Onassis to have the best of everything.
They had big tempers, both of them, as Greeks tend to do. We were once in a nightclub in Monte Carlo. Everybody was enjoying themselves, and someone said, "Tell me, Maria, does Ari ever make love to you anymore?" And she turned around and said, "Never," but in a jocular mood. And Onassis lost his temper, and he said, "Messena pote me alles poli," which means, "With you, never, with others, a lot."
A year later, when Maria became pregnant, Onassis insisted she have an abortion. His commitment to her was nearing an end.
She certainly loved him more than he loved her. But at the end of his life, he deeply regretted not having married her or not having stayed with her, because, after all, once you marry your mistress, you create a job vacancy.
A new face appeared on his horizon in the summer of 1963. Jackie Kennedy had a sister, Lee Radziwill, who was a friend of Onassis. And when Jackie's third child died at birth, Onassis invited her, through Lee, to recuperate on board the Christina. The president objected, but Jackie welcomed the chance.
I think the Kennedys were sort of too rough for her. and they never gave her enough money. And when she and Lee first came over in Greece, when Kennedy was still alive, I think she was sort of taken aback by the wealth of Onassis and the comfort. Even the President of the United States didn't have that kind of wealth.
By the end of their cruise, it was apparent that Jackie and Onassis had formed a mutual admiration society.
What Onassis found attractive in Jackie was she was the world's numero uno. She was better known than the Queen of England. She was known everywhere, and, you know, it was a natural progression for Onassis.
With JFK's assassination, the fantasy was no longer unthinkable.
I think the day Jack Kennedy died, he said to one of his aides, a man called Costa Gratsos, "That is the next Mrs. Onassis." And he started to woo her very soon after Dallas. And it was the most secret, long-term wooing you've ever known. I mean, he saw her more often than anyone realized. And he wooed her for 5 years.
Robert Kennedy opposed his sister-in-law's romance with Onassis, in part because of his own political ambitions. And then, in 1968, he was assassinated.
The moment that Onassis heard this, he said, "The last obstacle has just been removed. I'm going to marry Jackie."
6 weeks later, the wedding took place on his private island in the Ionian Sea.
He was the one man in the world that could supply her with the security, with the safety, with the wonderful sort of lifestyle that she wanted and had become used to. You know, he was the man that could make up for Air Force One.
Roll number 2. Roll number 2.
Media from all over the world descended on Scorpios. Not even on board the Christina was the wedding party safe from the journalists who were in their own boats. Any notable appearance, as that of John Kennedy Jr., provoked hysteria among the paparazzi, and the Greek Coast Guard had to restore order. His children were of one mind on the marriage.
Alexander and Christina were obviously, when you look at the pictures, were obviously in shock, like children tend to be when they see this monumental events taking place.
And it wasn't just two rich kids seeing perhaps their heritage disappearing. They genuinely believed that this was a disaster for their father, a disaster for their mother, a disaster perhaps for Jackie. Within 48 hours of the marriage, Onassis left Jackie on the island to go off and make a business deal. He left her behind her. I mean, what kind of a honeymoon is that? It's like he'd got the wonderful Picasso. It was on the wall. He didn't have to sit and look at it now. He was going off and doing what he did best, and that was making deals.
It was said in the press that the marriage of Jackie and Harry was a match made in heaven. Onassis loved fame and Jackie loved money. But would the honeymoon last? Conflicts and separations when biography continues.
Para la habilidad y el talento, no hay edad, nacionalidad ni color.
Hey, let's get something straight, man. I beat your ass fair and square. You beat me, I don't show up and cry. So your name is? Billy Hope.
El básquetbol es el marco en donde las diferencias desaparecen, las fuerzas se unen y los colores se fusionan.
Billy, this is not about black and white. Don't take it personally, baby. We're teammates.
Wesley Snipes y Woody Harrelson se convierten en la combinación perfecta en Los blancos no saben saltar, pero se divierten tratando. Clasificación B. Pago por evento.
En diciembre, la revista oficial de Cablevisión está más animada que nunca. Te invitamos a vivir Toon Week, la semana más prendida que nos regala Cablevisión con las superestrellas de Cartoon Network. Acércate al rey del pop. Descubre toda la magia de Michael Jackson y de su espectacular concierto en el Estadio Azteca. Madonna llega a la pantalla de Cablevisión con un equipo muy especial. No te pierdas un magnífico reportaje de la controvertida cantante. De la industria fílmica mundial surge Macaulay Culkin, un pobre angelito que lucha por mantenerse en la cima de su carrera. Verifica la programación de pago por evento. Suscríbete al 227-1515 o cómprala en tu puesto de revistas, pero llévate todo el entretenimiento de la revista oficial de Cablevisión en el mes de diciembre. Cablevisión, más imagen a tu televisión.
Biography returns to the story of Aristotle Onassis. When his new bride turned 40 in 1969, Onassis presented her with a 40-carat diamond. His son declared it's the perfect match. My father loves names and Jackie loves money. But Onassis entered the marriage with sincere hopes for happiness, as did Jackie. And at least in the seclusion of the Christina, there were early signs of domestic tenderness. Like most newlyweds, Onassis and Jackie enjoyed smooth sailing through the honeymoon phase of the marriage, perhaps unaware of how different their personalities were, or because opposites really do attract, at least for a while. But soon their incompatible makeups would lead to conflicts and prolonged separations.
She was more intellectual than he was. His idea of a good time was to sit around with his buddies and drink. Her idea of a good time was to sit around with artists and writers and discuss the human condition, I guess. To that extent, she was much better than he was.
The shopping expeditions of Jackie O became legend. Women's Wear Daily dubbed her God's gift to retail. Onassis could foot any bill, but he resented it when she couldn't stay within her monthly allowance of $30,000. With her own children, Jackie was a devoted mother, but Onassis noticed she made no effort to reach out to his son and daughter. Jackie went on another spending spree when the time came to redo House on Scorpios. The project dragged on for several years and cost millions.
Onassis at first delighted in it, said, the wife of Aristotle, Onassis cannot drive around in an ordinary family sedan. People would think that I'm going broke, which is another interesting window on his mind. He thought of Jackie's spending habits as a reflection of himself. Later, of course, as the relationship soured, he turned it completely on its head, this thing that he had once so approved of, and began to regard her as a thankless bloodsucker who was taking him for everything that he was worth.
No matter how rich you are, you somehow start to feel that, God, haven't I got anything else this woman wants except my money? He called her a cold-hearted, shallow woman, but she certainly is not shallow. If anybody was shallow in that relationship, it was him, because he cared only about business, and that's it.
Renewing his affair with Maria Callas, Onassis was photographed with her at Maxime's in Paris in 1970. Furious, Jackie flew to Paris the next day to be photographed with her husband in the same restaurant. Family events began to slip from the grasp of Onassis. No longer shy, Christina was a willful young woman with money to indulge her tastes.
Christina was always terribly aware of being the daughter of the Greek tycoon. She reveled in it. She loved it. She spent Harry's money almost as fast as Jackie Kennedy spent his money.
At 19, and much against her father's will, Christina married a divorced older man from Los Angeles, Joseph Bolker. Onassis immediately blocked the $75 million trust fund he had set up for her to receive at age 21. Then Christina's mother, Tina, married the enemy of the family, Stavros Niarchos, a man Christina hated and feared. Feeling pressured and betrayed by both her parents and not happy in her California marriage, Christina took an overdose of pills, not the first time she had so reacted. When she recovered, she began divorce proceedings. Alexander was working for Olympic Airlines, paid a meager $12,000 a year by his father, with whom he was barely on speaking terms.
He almost did everything to destroy his son himself. He never helped him. He was jealous of him. He was jealous of his youth. He was jealous of his independence, because the kid was creating an independence for himself. He was jealous of his son's relationship with Fiona Thiessen.
It was Fiona, a former model 16 years older than he was, who encouraged Alexander to get closer to his father.
she got them to talk to each other. Toward the end of Alexander's life, under the relentless prodding of Fiona Thiessen, at long last, father and son were able to sit down and have a reasonable conversation like reasonable men, which is why Alexander's death is all the more tragic on all these counts.
Alexander died from injuries after his plane crashed on a routine flight in 1973. The shock of his death and his father's unresolved feelings toward the boy nearly destroyed him.
Onassis was utterly devastated, to a degree that astonished the people around him. They couldn't believe that this man had that much love in him for anyone, let alone for his son.
Could you tell me, sir, how you feel about this?
Well, like any other human being, I'm not anything special or exceptional. Like any father would feel, he was a nice boy. He was a promising boy and a good boy. Particularly in the difficult days that we lived.
After the loss of his son, the confident public facade of Onassis began to crumble. His shipping business was booming, his fleet now generating monthly profits of $10 million. But as the grieving father said at this time, millions do not add up to what a man needs out of life. In October 1973, oil-producing nations began an embargo that crippled the shipping business. To diversify, Onassis proposed building a refinery in New Hampshire. But in 1974, he suffered the biggest defeat of his career.
The people of New Hampshire rose up against it, and to his astonishment, they won. And in fact, people around Onassis believed that the defeat of the New Hampshire refinery was part of what brought on his illness.
Christina took her father to a New York hospital where his condition was diagnosed as myasthenia gravis, an immune system disorder. One symptom was droopy eyelids, which Christina taped open with Band-Aids. Although unwell, Onassis flew to Athens at the end of 1974 when a new Greek government sought to repossess Olympic Airways. Planes were grounded as he negotiated with hostile officials. In the end, he lost the airline and what remained of his health. He returned to Paris after a painful attack of gallstones, facing the prospect of major surgery. At her father's side, Christina would never forgive Jackie for failing to be with her husband during his recent crises. Onassis entered the hospital in February to have his gallbladder removed. After the operation, the press gathered on the kind of watch usually reserved for statesmen and movie stars. Onassis seemed to be making a slow but steady recovery when his heart gave out. He died at the hospital on March 15, 1975, at the age of 75. The next day, Jackie arrived to take her husband's body to Greece for burial. The will Onassis had made out a year earlier listed Christina as his principal heir to receive all the assets of his far-flung empire. But under Greek law, Jackie, as his widow, was entitled to a percentage. Settling of the will would be the subject of long and bitter negotiation.
One of the most bizarre scenes at Onassis' funeral, I suppose, was the presence of Teddy Kennedy. And Christina Onassis knew that Teddy Kennedy was there for a purpose, and that purpose wasn't to grieve for her father. And they were in the car when Teddy said to her, "I'm terribly sorry about your father. I want you to know that we're all very sad. But there's one thing that we must talk about. We must talk about the money." She just exploded in that tiny car, and she said, "You go, and I'll get another car." She got the car behind. She got into the car behind. She wouldn't travel anymore. She never spoke to him again, ever.
Onassis was buried next to his son on Scorpios in the family tomb he had built when Alexander was killed. Greek peasants, Kennedy clan members, and boatloads of media people gathered to watch the most famous Greek of the 20th century put to rest. But in a way, Aristotle Onassis himself might have approved this day belonged to Christina.
Gathering the servants, the crew of the yacht, her father's executives around her, she said, "This ship and this island are mine. You are all my people now."
Biography will continue in a moment.
¡Ya se armó el reventún!
¿Con arma blanca?
¡No! El reventún es la gran fiesta final de Toon Week.
¿Y nos invita a Cablevisión, Pedro?
¡Claro! Anímate a vivir el reventún del siglo este sábado 18 en un parque de diversiones que está al sur de la ciudad.
Espero que Benito se haya encargado de las reservaciones.
¡Un trillón de gracias, Cablevisión!
Estos seres son el producto de una aleación entre carne y circuitos. Detrás de cada rostro puede esconderse un enemigo letal.
Mostly machine. You're not really human anymore, are you?
You're a cyborg. Computers will try to slave civilization.
Siente toda la acción de una cinta estremecedora y cumple la misión imposible de...
They have to be stopped before they start a war between cyborgs and humankind.
You know, I don't know why I'm helping you, Jared. I need your help with the cyborgs.
El último enemigo. Clasificación B. Pago por evento.
En diciembre, la revista oficial de Cablevisión está más animada que nunca. Te invitamos a vivir Toon Week, la semana más prendida que nos regala Cablevisión con las superestrellas de Cartoon Network. Acércate al rey del pop. Descubre toda la magia de Michael Jackson y de su espectacular concierto en el Estadio Azteca. Madonna llega a la pantalla de Cablevisión con un equipo muy especial. No te pierdas un magnífico reportaje de la controvertida cantante. De la industria fílmica mundial surge Macaulay Culkin, un pobre angelito que lucha por mantenerse en la cima de su carrera. Verifica la programación de Pago por Evento. Suscríbete al 227-1515 o cómprala en tu puesto de revistas, pero llévate todo el entretenimiento de la revista oficial de Cablevisión en el mes de diciembre. Cablevisión, más imagen a tu televisión.
Pago por Evento lleva hasta tu pantalla el próximo 18 de diciembre el evento. La magna función de boxeo del campeón mexicano Julio César Chávez contra Andy Holligan por el campeonato mundial superligero. Además, en el mismo cuadrilátero, 2 campeonatos estelares con grandes figuras como Terry Norris, Simon Brown, Michael Nonn y Merky Sosa, así como la pelea de exhibición entre Héctor Macho Camacho y Lee Fortune. Contrata hoy mismo el evento llamando al 709-8486. Y recuerda que está disponible para circuitos cerrados en el área metropolitana. Pago por Evento siempre a lo grande y solo por Cablevisión.
Biography returns to the story of Aristotle Onassis. Christina seized the reins of her father's empire with a determination Aristotle Onassis would have admired. But her personal life was marred by drug abuse and marital failures. She married Alexander Andreadis in 1975. The wedding marked the last time Christina would be upstaged by her stepmother. She had arranged to pay Jackie Onassis $26 million to finally settle the will. In return, Jackie renouncing all claims on the estate. The marriage to Andreadis lasted only 2 years. She married Sergei Kauzov in 1978. Kauzov, a Soviet shipping official, turned out to be in the pay of the KGB. Christina divorced him a year later. In 1984, she married Terry Roussel, and before they too were divorced, Christina received her most precious gift, her daughter Athena. But this happiness was short-lived. In 1988, Christina died suddenly at the age of 37. It was surmised that years of drastic weight changes and her use of amphetamines had proved too much for her heart. Roussel, who soon married his longtime mistress, was named one of 5 to manage the estate until Athena turns 19 in the year 2004. In the person of one small child, the $500 million legacy of Aristotle Onassis lives on. That brings to a close our look at the life of Aristotle Onassis. There have been others wealthier than Ari, but few have rivaled him in audacity and ambition. As a businessman, his triumphs were numerous, and he wasn't afraid to flaunt his riches. But his private life unfolded more like a Greek tragedy than a success story. Onassis left behind a legacy of hundreds of millions of dollars, but it wasn't until his final days that he seemed to realize his fortune was as much a burden as a blessing for him and for the people close to him. I'm Peter Graves. Until next time on Biography.